And the first thing our men said were, "Where are your women? Like, where you can't talk about forming a union and you have no women here. What are you thinking?"
I'm Mitch.
And I'm Missy.
We're coworkers.
He's the boss, and we're married.
And she's the boss. Together, we host Good Faith Weekly, a podcast on faith and culture.
What could possibly go wrong?
Tune in and find out. Missy. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, but we're catching up from two different locations as I am on the road with Good Faith Media. And then we're going to talk about a very special celebration coming up this weekend. I turned 53. Don't tell anybody. And then later on in the pod, we sit down with Betty Lyons, the president and executive director of the American Indian Law Alliance. And it is a wonderful conversation, and you're going to want to make certain to listen. So it's going to be a good pod. Stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing very, very well. So you're back at the mothership.
Yes, we are in different places today recording because you're traveling, doing lots of great things for Good Faith Media. So I'm back home holding down the fort. So, but we'll have more on all of your adventures later. But for now, this is a weekend of celebration.
For what?
Right?
Please do tell.
Well,
what are we celebrating?
Two things. One, you're going to be so thrilled that I know this, but today begins what?
Today begins, I don't know.
Premier League soccer.
Oh, yes, it does. The season is officially underway.
Begins today. I mean, and it's your birthday weekend. So
it is my birthday weekend. I first want to address the Premier League. I am a Manchester United supporter. And for the record, I know it's always the hope that kills you. And I know that I hope that we end up at the top of the table. Most likely we're not. But
I actually took a quiz that told me what team I was supposed to support.
Oh, I cannot wait to hear this.
Well, I can't find it now. It was I think it was Everton.
Everton, really?
Is that right? Yeah. So they ask you a bunch of questions that I didn't know answers to.
Everton's one of the oldest clubs in the Premier League. It's a good choice.
So apparently that's my team this year.
Okay, well then root away.
Absolutely. So and also it's your birthday weekend, which I mean it was really nice of Premier League to start on your birthday. That's a great birthday
They're
present.
always so thoughtful that way.
So I thought I would maybe ask you about some of your favorite birthday memories since we're celebrating all weekend long.
You know, I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I grew up on the east side. My parents were really young, trying to make it in the world. And so, you know, birthdays, you know, were put together and they were fun, enjoyable. I'd have my friends from the neighborhood come over to the house. We'd have picnics out in the front yard. My mom would always make a cake, which was wonderful. It was always chocolate. We would have the proverbial streamers and balloons and all of that. And I just had a great time with all my childhood friends.
This sounds very different than a child's birthday party in the year of our Lord 20 and 23. I'm just saying.
You know what? Hey. I do remember one. I remember when we went big time. I mean, and this is when I really thought my parents had like hit the jackpot. And that was my first birthday at McDonald's. I mean, we were living it up.
They sprang for it, didn't they?
They did. I mean, I ate the lead paint and everything on Grimace and the Hamburglar.
Oh, that makes my thighs burn just thinking about it. Climbing up in that thing. Do you know what? A while back, I told you, I mean, we've talked about me going through old boxes of stuff since my mom passed. I found a receipt from my second birthday party at McDonald's, like for the cost of the birthday party with all of the kids.
Imagine.
It was $23 for the entire birthday party. I thought, I think spending $23 per kid that you invite nowadays is probably more typical, if not more. So yeah, times have changed, huh?
They have. So that was a great memory. Also, I have this wonderful memory of my grandmother, Okema Randall, on my dad's side. She was uh, uh, Muskogee Creek, and she loved birthdays. And on my birthday, she would always swing by the house and pick me up. And obviously, I was a summer birthday. And so she'd pick me up and take me to lunch to Hank's Hamburgers, which I took you and Starlette there when we were in Tulsa covering the Tulsa Race Massacre. It was just you had root beer and greasy cheeseburger. And then when I was younger, she would take me to Trippett's and buy me a brand new pair of shoes for school. And that was a great memory. And that later evolved into taking me to this like little local men's clothier at Rimberg's and buying me a shirt or sweater or coat or something like that. So
I remember both. And I remember Trippett's because when our boys were born, I remember that's something tradition that carried on, and they each got their first little pair of walking shoes at Trippett's.
Yeah, and
really
it was just this little kind of, it wasn't really a hole in the wall, just this little boutique shoe store for kids.
It was definitely a boutique by the time we came along.
Oh yeah.
But it was neat. So yeah, those were really special memories, I think.
Well, thank you for wishing me happy birthday. I'm excited. I'll be 53 years old this year.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll try to figure out a gift for you before you come back home.
If you can have the AC fixed when I get home, that will be fantastic.
You know what? I'm not kidding you. As of the time this podcast drops, the AC should be fixed.
Oh, glory.
I wasn't going to say anything about it. I wasn't going to say anything in fear that it might jinx it. But by the time this podcast drops, you guys, we should have air conditioning, and therefore you will be allowed back home.
That will be one of the best presents I've ever had, and I appreciate that. But we got to sit down with this wonderful, wonderful woman. In fact, she reminded me the spirit of my grandmother because she's so active and advocating for Indigenous rights. You and I got to sit down with Betty Lyons this week. Betty is the president and executive director of the American Indian Law Alliance. And she was just so delightful to talk to, the issues that her and her organization are dealing with. It brought back a lot of memories because I can remember my grandmother saying a lot of the same things that Betty said during our interview today. So it was a good week to have Betty on the show.
It really was. I very much I don't know. I could have really listened to her much, much longer. I found her fascinating. And like you said, it just reminded me so much of your family experience and of feeling the generations of tradition and connectedness within the Indigenous people. So it's a great conversation.
And we think you're going to enjoy it as well. So stay tuned. Betty Lyons from the American Indian Law Alliance is with us next.
Baptist Women in Ministry is celebrating its 40th anniversary in 2023. Baptist Women in Ministry, BWIM, will gather in Louisville, Kentucky, October 2nd through the 4th to celebrate. Louisville, it's where BWIM's founding mothers met 40 years ago to begin the movement. The celebration will include the premiere of a documentary about BWIM's founding, plenary sessions, times of worship, connection and self-care, and a banquet to honor BWIM's foremothers. Join Baptist Women in Ministry this October in Louisville. Learn more and register at bwim.info. Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Betty Lyons is president and executive director of the American Indian Law Alliance. She is an Indigenous and environmental activist and citizen of the Onondaga Nation. Betty has worked for the Onondaga Nation for 20 years. Betty continues to work for the protection of Indigenous peoples who are fighting to protect their traditions, territories, resources, and care for Mother Earth. Betty, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are delighted that you are here. This is a first for us at Good Faith Weekly. We're in 3 different locations. I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Missy's back in Norman, Oklahoma at HQ. And, where are you calling in today from?
I'm on the Onondaga Nation, which is located just south of Syracuse, New York.
Syracuse, New York. Well, I don't know about you, Betty, but it has been a blistering summer this year. Now, I don't know about New York, but down in Oklahoma, it has been horribly hot. So how have you been getting by?
It has been horribly hot, and it's really concerning, to us, as we see now. We used to have really cold winters here in central New York. We even used to have more snow than Buffalo at times.
Oh, wow.
Which is a big deal, right? Because we're always, measuring the inches of snow that fall. And, the past few years, we used to get probably 20 below zero for a couple of weeks. Now we get it for 1 or 2 days, and that's it. And so, unfortunately, we're seeing the end of spring. We don't have a very long spring at all. The transition from winter to spring is rather quick, and so we're learning to adapt to our planting, our crops, our fruits, our vegetables, all of those things. That has really dramatically changed, and right now we're having like more weather events, right, than we've ever seen. The heat, of course, and now a lot of rain, and so it's I guess made me really worry about, because of the acceleration and all of that over the past 10 years, it had me thinking, what is it going to look like in another 10,
Right. Betty, and this is such a great segue into our first question with you today. One of your passions is an educator, an activist, an advocate for caring for Mother Earth. And one of the questions I have for you as an Indigenous person myself is, how do you connect your tradition and help us understand an Indigenous person's understanding of the symbiotic relationship that humanity has with Mother Earth?
Thank you. It's such a really great question, and very insightful, because a lot of people don't even think about our relationship as being so interconnected. And really all of humanity, our relationship with Mother Earth should be interconnected. We as Indigenous people don't see ourselves above any other living being. We see ourselves as equal to that. We just have different roles and responsibilities. I think we as humans do that the worst. We depend on all other living beings to survive, and our mother to survive. And, it's so intertwined. It's like woven like a basket into the fabric of our life, of how we are. Like my name, for example, my original name is Gainha'a, which means small sky. My eldest son is Onegano, which means cold water. And my youngest son is Dehahuwakwa, which means he lifts up the canoe. And we received those names we're matrilineal. So it's through the mother's clan. So my children are Snipe because I'm Snipe, and we get them out of this basket. And so when our children are given these names, it's said in the Longhouse that, now all of the animals, the plants and animals will know you, like the medicines will know you when you call for their help. And now my concern with, climate change, the acceleration of that change, how will they know me? How are they going to know my children if we call for help? And that's scary. It's scary to me. And so, like I said, we see ourselves as relatives. As my aunt would always say, all living beings, there are relatives, not resources, We give gratitude to them every day. So we have a Thanksgiving address, and it's given every single day, not just once a year. And it's about having great gratitude for everything that is provided for us here, to be able to live in peace. And part of that peace, so like if I were to address you, I would say Nyohaskanu, and I would greet you with a message of peace. And I would say, I'm thankful that you are well. And wellness is also interconnected with peace, which is interconnected with all living things. And you can't have peace without having that reciprocal relationship.
Wow.
Well, Betty, that is absolutely beautiful. And just so you know, Mother Earth is listening to you, because outside of my window right now, there is a thunderstorm rolling in to Albuquerque. So
That's great.
dry area is needing some rain. So thank you so much for that beautiful explanation.
Well, even though I sit here in the heat of Oklahoma, you're talking about your children's names just gave me goosebumps. So thank you for that explanation. That was beautiful. But another part of your work draws attention to the 15th century papal edict doctrine of discovery. So for our listeners and those of us who grew up in states where maybe we got a sentence in a history book about this, would you explain and define doctrine of discovery and how it's been used historically and the effects it still has upon Indigenous peoples?
Yes, it was a papal bull that was done in the 15th century, mid 1400s, by Pope Nicholas. And basically what it said was that if the explorers were to go out into a new land or territory, and they were met with what they called pagan Saracens and enemies of Christ, meaning that they were not Christian, then they could lay dominance over those lands and take them for themselves. They would say that those lands were void, and they used the term terra nullis. And so if they came and you didn't accept the indigenous people, or when they went to the continent of Africa, they didn't accept Christianity, then they could be enslaved or murdered. And even after some accepted, were forcefully pushed, Christianity was forced upon them. And if they didn't subscribe to that, and even when they did, they weren't seen as equal to all other people, if you will. And, this kind of started, the doctrine of discovery started the land grab. It started the Atlantic slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and so many other things that kind of, I would say, has like snowballed into this effect of what we're dealing with today. It also brought boarding schools, that entire mentality. It just kind of kept folding over like one century after another. And, that they were going to, kill us off. They wanted our lands. They wanted to take them any way that they could. So genocide was definitely on their mind. Taking our land was on their mind. Using up all the natural resources, which also goes, back again to climate change that we were talking about earlier. It's a mentality, and it has affected us so greatly that we are still reeling from the effects of that doctrine of discovery. I look at our community, I look at our nations and our peoples, and how much we have to try to peel, I call it the rotten onion, and peel the layers off to be able to be strong, to be healthy, to be well. And it's devastating. It is absolutely devastating. It again brought, like I told you earlier, the boarding schools to our families. And that in and of itself was devastating. It was about eliminating our culture, our ways, cutting our children's hair, making them wear uniforms, taking their traditional clothes away from them, not allowing them to speak their language. You think about the intergenerational trauma, the historic trauma, the intergenerational trauma, and then the trauma all of us carry around from just our families, So it's like 100-pound knapsack that we're walking around with, and kind of hitting each other with. We were given like these divisive tools from this colonization, from this doctrine, and now we weaponize it against each other. And so, unfortunately, you see a lot of lateral violence in our communities, and we're really trying. So many people are trying to unpack all of that so that we can have wellness and healthiness, happiness, right, in our own systems, and be able to thrive.
Now, Betty, you just did a beautiful job explaining to us the theological framework in which all of these tragedies within the last several hundred years have taken place. The Atlantic slave trade, colonialism, Western expansionism, the boarding schools, across not only this continent but in other locations. But recently, the Catholic Church made somewhat of an attempt to not necessarily repeal the doctrine of discovery, but was it a denouncement, or tell us a little bit about what the Catholic Church did in trying to address that edict back in the 15th century?
Yeah, so they have what's called repudiated the doctrine of discovery, but they have not rescinded it. I think about my Aunt Tanya often. She was the founder of the American Indian Law Alliance and wrote the first report on the doctrine of discovery. It was a study done which really garnered a lot of ground in this area. And then Steve Newcomb, brilliant. If you ever get a chance to read some of his work, I suggest that you do that. Really kind of decoding this doctrine, all that it meant. And I'm grateful that the Catholic Church is now open, willing, and wanting to have this conversation. And we can't move this along without allies. We need our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters, to step forward, learn about this, to really try to unravel it in so many ways, because it's the basis of racism. This domination of one religion over another. I mean, there's so much to it. And now the Catholic Church is so open. And when I was talking to some of the folks at the Vatican, this is coming right from the Pope. And he's saying that he wants to see something different, instead of this hierarchical system, something, where people have more agency over what's happening, including women in that process. All of those things are so important. And so we're looking forward to having more meaningful conversations with them, because you can't just repudiate it and move on, right? It's not actually like, rescinding it. Like, where we have to figure out how can this be used, this repudiation, and then hopefully having them rescind it, to then turn around some of the terrible things that have happened due to the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is the basis for all Indian land law in the United States. And I don't know if you know that or not. So I think it's important to say that, part of that land grab. And that was part of one of the case. We had a case that when we asked the Supreme Court to look at it, and they denied that. And, because of that denial, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who we would have thought maybe, would have more thoughtfully looked at our case, cited the doctrine of discovery in the, the written statement. And so all of that said, we're hoping that now we can have more meaningful dialogue with not just the Catholic Church, but all Christians. I think it is so important that all Christians understand, and not just Christians either. I mean, there are certainly other religions as well, but all Christians, start to understand what that did around the world, not just in North America, in Central and South America, where the doctrine of discovery is still being used for mining, to suppress people, to take their land, and steal the resources that, are underneath them in the ground, but all over the world, in Africa, New Zealand, Australia, just it really is so blanketing. In Canada, I mean, it's everywhere,
Yeah. you talked about the case that was filed by the Onondaga Nation that recently went to the Supreme Court, but they refused to listen to the case. In that case, you are arguing that land was taken away from the tribe illegally. You're one of many tribes who have said that very same thing. So now the Supreme Court has refused to listen to the case. What are your options now?
So now we have moved our case over to the Organization of American States, which is an international forum. So, because the Supreme Court didn't, want to hear the case because of the doctrine of discovery, that was the ruling. And, when I think about our case and how special and different it is, we weren't trying to take back, kick people off their land that they have bought or purchased. I mean, it's hard to kind of go and unpack what happened, a couple hundred years ago, right? And how do you change that? So we were trying to not cause harm. And I thought that that's what made ours so special. Like, it was so special. It wasn't about, we're trying to coexist in this life and world and on our Mother Earth, and trying to work in allyship with folks. And we're very peaceful people. And, kind of astounding to me that it wasn't taken differently, I guess, and it wasn't accepted. And so this, Organization of American States, now is starting that is starting to open up in another way in which we can get our, our land petition reviewed and, hopefully settled in some way. We were just recently given about 1,023 acres. And I'll give you the background of that. It stems because, Onondaga Lake, which is our sacred lake, it's the birthplace of democracy. And I think it should be important to everyone, especially in the United States, because the U.S. government patterned their government after our government, after our peacemaker came and brought our 5 warring nations together and giving our 3 parts of government. And it basically gave us the rules and laws that we would govern each other and ourselves by. And now I look, we've given some of this land back. It's really contaminated. And now they want to put constraints on what we can do with this land now. And so there's always a twist or a caveat. Like they can't just give back the land and say, here you are. We're sorry that we not only destroyed this pristine, beautiful area, and here it is in all its, toxicity, and let us deal with it. They're trying to tell us that we can't keep it private and allow it to heal. And so, there's so much to it. There's so many layers to it. And I hope that someday you both will be able to come up to the lake, because I think it's so important that people know that we were given recognition for the United States government asked our leaders to come and teach them how we govern. And, in Philadelphia, we still have a lot that they gifted us then to camp and to be able to go visit with them. And the first thing our men said were, where are your women? Like, you can't talk about forming a union and you have no women here. What are you thinking?
Wow.
For us, we're matrilineal. And so our women choose our leadership. It's really beautiful. And if those men are not doing their duty, our clan mothers have the right to lift them up into that leadership role, and they have the right to remove them if they're not doing their job. And those leaders are picked on compassion, basis of character, compassion, love, kindness. Are they going to defend their people? Are they going to defend their nation and their own clan? All of that is so interwoven. And so when I'm telling you all of this, it's hard to dissect little pieces out because of how intertwined it all is,
It goes back to the analogy you gave at the beginning of a basket woven together, that we're all interconnected as our systems that we build, and as we all depend on one another. I'm loving your descriptions of all of this, but I wondered if we could talk for a minute about your partnership with the National Institution of Law and Justice. They've launched an initiative to help Indigenous families investigate their missing girls, women, and two-spirits. Can you talk a little bit about this and your partnership and how you're addressing this issue?
Yes. So Mark Pucci, the founder of the National Institute for Law and Justice, approached me. I used to be a board member for the Future Foundation, and he approached me at their golf event and asked if we would partner with them to help them, because they are non-Indigenous people, bridge the gap. They're retired homicide detectives, and so they have a certain skill set. Mm-hmm. And they're amazing, wonderful people, dedicated. They've retired. And instead of just retiring, they certainly could retire and go play golf. They could hang out with their families. They don't have to pick this cause up. And it's so meaningful to Mark Pucci, the founder. You know, he gets emotional. He sheds tears with me. And he's so passionate about this that I knew that this was the right fit, because all this time, the Law Alliance was trying to figure out, it's great, the statistics, we need those. We need the reporting. We need all that information. But for us at the Law Alliance, we wanted the next step. We wanted the action behind it. How are you going to find, our missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and relatives? How are you going to find them? Who's going to do any of that work? And it certainly didn't.
I want to interrupt you, and I apologize, but
Sure.
Just for the audience's sake, I don't think our audience realizes the extent of this problem. So can you give us a little information about what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So part of the doctrine of discovery also brought with it, that we are not seen as human, equal to all other humans. We're not treated the same way. And so I will just talk about Canada and the US, okay, because I have more familiarity with that. But there's probably about 7,000 Indigenous women, relatives, and girls in Canada that have gone missing and murdered, and their cases are never followed up on. We're talking cold cases.
Wow.
In the United States, it's over 3,000. And so, this is I would call it an epidemic, right, of great proportion, that our folks are not even looked to after they die. They don't even have the dignity. And I'll say this, that my partner, who's our spiritual leader of our Six Nations, Tadadaho Sedhill, has a niece that was murdered, and nothing has been done to find her murderer, to go after the person or persons that, she was in college, going to school in Buffalo, and murdered. And we have no answers and no information. How is that possible? I mean, I know that, sometimes you may not have a lead, right? You may not have information, but the fact that they're not even actively pursuing and looking into these cases. And so the National Institute of Law and Justice is going to start going after, cases. They want that information. They have a webpage and a telephone number that you can call, and a form that you can fill out on their webpage. And we have a link to it in our website as well, to be able to list your loved one or someone that you're concerned about, all the information that you have in there, and then they will take the information and then investigate what has happened to them. And so I'm glad that you had asked that question. It's, Mitch, very important, because you're talking about people that, we're very afraid of the outside. We don't always give our information freely to anyone, because it can be used against us, as it has in the past. Mm-hmm. And so when you have someone like Mark Pucci and his team, and you know that it's real and they're willing and wanting to do this work, that's the difference. That was the difference for me. And so a lot of places throughout the United States and into Canada, they have what's called man camps. So they're mining for different things. They're fracking, they're they're laying in pipeline all over the place. And all of those areas, you see a huge rise in Canada and the US, a huge rise in missing and murdered women, girls, and relatives. They're taken, they're sold into, sex trafficking, they're murdered, they're raped, all of these different things for all of these different issues that come up. And you can follow each area and where they're having this extractive industries going on and the rise in those cases. And I can't say enough about this organization, and so grateful that they asked us to partner with them, to try to bridge the gap between our nation and others, right? Like, so we have a whole confederacy to make people feel comfortable and, more willing and wanting to give personal information out. So I am so grateful that you asked that question. It's really, I hope someday that you'd be able to meet them. Just an amazing group of people and investigators wanting to do the right thing, because not to make money, they're not making any money on it. They basically, poor Mark is paying money out of his pocket sometimes to stay in hotel rooms, to get to places to do this work. And so, if anyone out there wants to donate to them, and, it would be greatly appreciated too.
Well, thank you so much, Betty, for the work that you're doing, as well as the partnership. I became aware of this issue almost a decade ago, talking to some partners and friends up in Canada and what they're doing up there with the First Nations peoples. So, and then beginning to do a deep dive into it and just learning all about what has happened to Indigenous women, not only through the centuries, but what's happening today. And so thank you for doing all the hard work on this. Well, Betty, it has been a delight. I could talk to you all day about this.
I could talk about this all day.
I can I can listen to Betty all day. How's that?
No, exactly. But we're going to get an opportunity to listen to you and others for several days up in Syracuse, New York, because on December 8th through the 10th of this year, there is a conference that you and others are hosting entitled The Religious Origins of White Supremacy, Johnson versus McIntosh, and the Doctrine of Christian Discovery. Can you tell us a little bit more about that conference, and can anybody attend?
Yes, thank you. Oh, this is great. Yes, anyone can attend. We welcome anyone and everyone from all areas of life, ages, whatever religion you believe in. It is about educating about history and about what this doctrine of domination of, how, as I had said earlier, the beginning origins of it all the way up into how it's affected us today. And so we're going to have different panels, conversations that are going to be happening, where it's going to be interactive, where people can ask questions. We'll have question and answer periods, and it's going to stretch over several days, and hope that all of you can attend. It's going to be held at Syracuse University. It's just an amazing group of people, brilliant people. We have people coming from New Zealand, people coming from Central and South America, because they're often forgotten about, our Indigenous folks there, and really mistreated. So it's important that they also are included in that. And, we're hoping to really have an open and honest, dialogue and start to build relationships and friendships. It's really about giving that information out, people understanding what really happened and transpired, what has happened since, and how it's affected everything along the way. And then how do we start to unravel it together? How can we work more in partnership on so many different things? We may not agree on everything, and that's okay. It's okay to not, not be in sync all the time, but that we can find common ground in some mutual areas and work on that.
Well, Betty Lyons, President and Executive Director of the American Indian Law Alliance, from my tongue of ancestry, Mado. Thank you.
Oh, Nyawaha. Nyawaha. Thank you so
Uh,
much.
Before we let you go, though, Betty, Missy's got one last question that she asked all of our guests. So, Missy, take it away.
So, Betty, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of the work that you do in our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
I feel that there is so much more to tell. But I hope that everyone, when they walk away from hearing this, they have more of an understanding of how interconnected they are to the natural world and how they're affected by that, how they're affected through their own peace and their own relationship, their own environment, wherever they live in, and always to give gratitude. Have gratitude. That's what we start our day on. It's not just once a year like Thanksgiving, right? We actually have a Thanksgiving address that we give every day. And it kind of brings us centered, so there is so much more to tell. We feel that we have the value system that is needed today to be able to make sure that we have a future to be able to give to future generations. So thank you.
Betty, thank you so much for being a guest this week. We really have been inspired by everything you have said.
Thank you. And thank you so much. I'm so grateful to both of you and all your listeners for having me here today.
I just cannot tell you, Missy, how much I enjoyed the conversation we just had with Betty Lyons. She, again, I said it in the intro, but she reminded me so much of my grandmother, her passion, her knowledge, her just knowledge about her people, her history was just remarkable.
The more I learn of the Indigenous people and the culture, and her illustration, and I mentioned it in the interview again, of the basket woven together clicked in a different way for me even. I remember in my little freshman or sophomore year of high school art one class, we did basket weaving. And so that very much was a memory of mine. And as I was thinking about literally weaving of the basket, and when she was talking about how our existence is interwoven with creation and with others, it just gave another visual of how Indigenous peoples do view a symbiotic relationship with our world. And, having been brought up in a culture that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know, taught, dominion over creation and others, this interconnectedness visual is so much more beautiful and I feel like more accurate to what our existence is supposed to be.
I agree. I mean, one of the things listening to Betty and other Indigenous scholars and leaders is you begin to understand their concept of the symbiotic relationship, not only between humanity and the earth, but between the physical world and the spiritual world. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that really, really inspires me because, I think about, they're talking about, Mother Earth and the spirit that the great creator, the great spirit that lives within the world, and even the spirit that dwells within us all. It seems like they understand it in a conceptual way that those of us who have been so influenced by Western thought don't understand. And that I find myself, the older I get, Missy, the more I am drawn to that type of understanding of the world, that type of theology, that type of humanness of what it means to be a person living within the community, not only of individuals, but a community of all living things. And so I love listening to Betty and to people like her talk about this symbiotic relationship. and what it means.
And I feel like as we learn about that, I feel like that's more of what the Bible really is communicating. When you look back at the Genesis narrative and the Old Testament narrative, and you see the way that God is showing people how to live and exist and care for the planet and care for the land. And I feel like there was the one verse taken out where it says, man shall rule over. And like you said, Western thought just makes you think, oh, well, this is what we're supposed to do, is rule over. That means we're supposed to rule over other people and over all living things. And but if you really look at it from that other perspective, that we are part of this earth, we are part of this system, we are part of the harmony, and we have the ability to disrupt that or to fulfill that and make it better. And we are not making the right choices.
One thing I like about Betty and others who talk about this, and whether it's an indigenous culture or an African culture or an Asian culture even, what I hear from those type of cultures is this importance of connectedness, but also a balance. And I can't remember if Betty talked about it in the interview or in our post-interview conversation, but she talked about the Onondaga people. The Onondaga Nation was actually the blueprint for democracy in this country. But when the colonists came to talk to the nation, the first question that the Onondagas asked was, "Where are your women?"
Right.
How can you have any type of leadership without women? Because in that indigenous culture, there was a balance, because It was the women of the culture who were the decision makers. They had the authority to make these decisions. And they were the landholders. That was an amazing story. Again, I can't tell if she can't remember. She
did. She did, and it goes back to what Kendall was saying in our interview last week about historically, before we had science and understanding, that cultures thousands of years ago were very matriarchal, because in their mindset, well, women are the ones who give life, and therefore, that only makes sense that creation and the earth was formed, your spiritual guide was more feminine. So no, I thought that was very interesting to hear. And just to think about how kind of that dominionism language so perverted gender and gender roles is really disheartening, again, as I unpack and deconstruct a lot of that. But the other thing that Betty talked about that I've just come to learn more about and really fully understand is the doctrine of discovery. And I remember hearing that in passing. It was probably like a vocab word on a history test, but just how that type of thinking has influenced history, has influenced policy, years ago, but also more recently today. And we've just all accepted that that's a normal ideology.
Yeah, that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand in the doctrine of discovery, that, it was a 15th century doctrine, a papal bull, as Betty explained to us, but people had to have a theological justification for doing what they were doing. And what they knew was that going someplace and taking people's land and enslaving them was ethically wrong. They knew that. So they had to have a theological justification in order to do that. And so they hid behind evangelism. They hid behind Christendom and said, we are going to go to these places and we're going to take this land. We're going to enslave these people. We are going to overpower them because we're trying to do good. We're trying to evangelize them and convert them to Christianity. It is a very Western mindset, still exists today. And it all began with this doctrine of discovery. And when it comes to the shores of North America, it quickly turns into Western expansionism, manifest destiny, that white Protestants were to rule over all else. And it's maddening. And the Christian church is responsible for this. And we've got some work to do. We've got a lot of repentance to do as a Christian community to a lot of indigenous cultures that have caused global and historic harm across the board.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's been interesting because I think the mental gymnastics that are required to get from, point A to point B in this, like you said, of, we're going to go quote unquote evangelize, and somehow that turns into stealing land and bodies and all sorts of terrible things. And, we look at it now and think, oh, that's crazy. How did they do that? Well, you know what? Not only did they do it, but we grew up in a system that accepted it.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was,
They accepted it, and then they promoted it and advocated for it and implemented it. And that's just the way it was, like you said. And it's so disheartening. And then you start to think, and this is where it really kind of messes with your mind. And I know you and I have had private conversations about this, but what are we doing today that is replicating that?
Yes. I wonder that all the time. What are we going to look back on? What are our kids and grandkids going to look back on and say, can you believe they thought X or Y or did this? And and trying to be more self-aware and really examine, all of our behaviors and actions. I'm sure we're missing something along the way. But like I said a couple of weeks ago, my hope is that every year I look back and think I've made progress, I've done better, and that's my hope.
Yeah, that's all we can do. We try to do better. We try to assess the realities that we are facing as a society, and when we see injustices, call those injustices out, and hopefully right those wrongs. And that's what we're trying to do. People often ask me, why do I hold the beliefs that I do? Why do I advocate for the issues that I advocate for? And it is out of a deep personal faith as a Jesus follower. My interpretation of Scripture, in particular the New Testament, is based upon Jesus advocating for the marginalized and oppressed. But also, right beside that, Missy, is the fact that I'm an Indigenous person. Now, I know my life personally has not been altered to a great degree, but there is something about generational trauma. Mm-hmm. And it is real. And, I don't think I've ever said this on this show before, but I remember when I became the executive director of Baptist Center for Ethics, I went to a prominent church down south, and one of their members, I'm sure, was joking at this church, but ended up calling me an Injun. And it was just like, what? What year are we in?
Wow.
It was like, we've come so far, but we still have so far to go. And that's why I'm so inspired by people like Betty and the work that the American Indian Law Alliance is doing.
Absolutely. I'm so thrilled to continue working with them and being part of their organization. And
and our audience will hear more about them in December as I head up to Syracuse, New York, to the conference. I'm really looking forward to hearing the speakers and learning more about what they're doing for Indigenous communities across the country.
Absolutely.
Well, Missy, thank you so much for wishing me happy birthday.
Yeah, well, maybe maybe that you can come home once the air conditioner's fixed.
All right. Well, will you let me know if it's not, because I may stay here in, New Mexico.
Spend your birthday in the beautiful
80 degrees. That's right.
Mountains out there. All right. Well, we'll be back next week in the same room again next time, and hopefully fewer sound and technical issues.
Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.